minutes, couple minutes, shift our attention from the breath to developing our motivation, our intention for today, for our lives, or at least for this class. So right now, I think that right now I have this human body, human mind, which is extremely precious. Each moment of this life actually is the most precious thing. We sometimes forget that, actually, right? But even like 1 hour is worth, of being alive is worth more than a million or $1 billion, for sure. Actually, because if you're dead, then money is useless. So this body, this mind, each moment is so precious. It won't last forever, for sure. So then the goal, right, is to take some essence, take some meaning, to make this life meaningful. So in that context, then, the best motivation is love and compassion. So love and compassion for ourselves, and love and compassion for countless others. So at least for this class, right, that we're here, right, with a sense of wanting ourselves and others to be happy, wanting ourselves and others to be free from suffering. So trying to develop in a way that will bring that about. So you can just think, right, I'm here then to relieve the suffering of myself and others, to bring happiness to myself and others. Ultimately, to progress on the path, to become more enlightened, ultimately fully enlightened, for the benefit of myself and all sentient beings. So as we listen, as we talk, as we meditate, contemplate, it's with an underlying sense of compassion and loving kindness. Okay, so let's come into a more interactive mode. And so I'll talk a little bit, then we'll interact, and we'll do some exercises interactively also. But so this is the first class in a series, right, on so this is, say, either transforming problems or transforming problems into happiness. You can title it either way, I guess. And so I thought first to talk about a little bit about what does that mean, right? And then we'll get into a particular Buddhist way of contemplating that can be useful. We'll do a whole bunch of those over the different classes, but today we'll focus on a particular one called the 8 worldly concerns or 8 worldly dharmas. But to start with, I thought to start more generally with this idea of, what does that mean, transforming problems into happiness? And I'll start with a few things. One is what is actually this? So, Buddhism would definitely start by saying problems are created by the mind, or in the mind, or with your mind. So what does that mean, actually, right? So a problem, right, or a problem is when you want a certain thing to happen and it doesn't happen, right? or when you don't want something to happen and it does happen. Right? That's pretty obvious, isn't it? Whereas when something's happening that I want to happen, then it's not a problem. And so, and actually though, when we don't usually notice that, do we? Like in other words, when I'm upset, right? I don't think, well, I set up an expectation of wanting things to be a certain way, and then they're not that way, right? Actually, what we usually think is just like, why can't they be the way I want, actually? Or we start to get upset. And this, as we get into the 8 worldly concerns, we'll go deeper into the psychology of this. Like there's a deep Buddhist psychological analysis of how this works. But to start simply, right? So we develop these. We relate to the world. Maybe that's a better way to say it. So we relate to the world, right? Wanting and expecting the world to be in accord with our wishes. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out that the world doesn't. Doesn't naturally accord to our wishes, right? You don't have to be like a Nobel Prize winner to figure that out. And actually, right, if we look around, right, we can look at our own lives, we can look at the lives of everybody we know, and then we can look at the lives of people we don't know, right? And the reality is obvious, right? In other words, people meet with all kinds of things that they don't want to meet with, and people aren't able to have everything they want. And so, it's important to understand that, right? Because so, in other words, it's actually true though. Like if you have to check it through introspection, your own experience. But when you experience a problem, it looks like something solid right there, right? Like just this week I had my water stopped working in my house, right? So when that happened, it was like I turned on the faucet and there's nothing, right? So immediately it's like, oh, this is a serious problem. How am I going to take a shower for work or whatever? Right? So immediately it looks like there's something there that's a problem. And it's very hard at that moment to realize, like, so you say it, that actually, like, that's not inherently, there's not a problem in the faucet, right? The faucet itself is not upset, right? Actually, the faucet doesn't feel anything. And it's hard to sort of at that moment step back, right? I'm just using that as an example, but we have all kinds of problems, right? We have relationship problems, we have physical problems, we have health problems, there's all different kinds, right? But I'm just using that as a simple example, right? Like, it's very hard actually at that moment to recognize, the problem is that because, is that I have an expectation and a kind of not just an expectation, but a kind of grasping, right? At things being a certain way. Then when they're not that way, it makes one feel what? Maybe upset, maybe anxious, maybe angry. It depends on the person and on the circumstances, right? So where did that problem come from? Right? Actually, according to Buddhism, right, everything is actually not just according to Buddhism, this is obvious, right? Everything that exists is a dependent arising. Right? In other words, it doesn't arise independently. It's pretty obvious, right? It depends on like a well, like it is in that instance, right? But it also depends on my mind. Right? Actually, it depends on. Actually, if you start to analyze just that, it's like infinitely complicated, right? How many people are involved in creating all these different systems, and then in my own expectations. So it looks. My point is this, though. So when a problem arises, it looks like, oh, that's the problem, right? If somebody's not nice to you, right, you think they're the problem, right? Immediately, there's this very strong visceral response, like a feeling. Oh, that person. Right, is a problem. And what Buddhist psychology is saying is if you stay on that level of looking at it, actually you'll never have genuine happiness, right? Because you're always going to have problems. But that the problems, like, should I say it the right way? That your mind is playing a key role in the creation of those problems. Does that make sense? People get that idea? Now, I want to elaborate on that a little bit, though. So, because sometimes people have like a wrong idea when you look at this, when we present this from a Buddhist perspective. So I just want to explain a little bit more, which is this, so learning to train your mind, right? This is the Buddhist training is training your mind. That doesn't mean like that, say right. Like, it doesn't mean that like somehow you're going to play a mental trick on yourself, and then when somebody treats you mean, you're going to just like think, like, oh, this is fun. Right? Like, in other words, that would be like an oversimplified view of Buddhism and of the Buddhist analysis of this. But sometimes people think that. I've seen people who like study this a little bit. Then they think, oh, so I'm just supposed to be happy whatever happens, right? Then something happens and they're not happy, and then they think, oh, I didn't do it right. So that's not what we're aiming at here. It's more complicated than that. And to get to some of the complication, that's where I want to lead into this 8 worldly concerns, okay, or 8 worldly things. And I want to kind of analyze those, and then we'll do the group exercise, 'cause I think that'll give us a basis for that. So in Buddhist psychology, there are these this list of 8 things that in some way characterizes most of normal life, actually, right? And so what these 8 things are the basis for most of our problems. Does that make sense? They're also the basis for not practicing. In other words, if one is, they say that if one is engaging in these 8 worldly things, one is not practicing spirituality. And so these 8 worldly things are not, they're just normal, they're the way normal people, they're the way normal people interact with their world. Okay? So one of them is liking to hear nice words about yourself, or to hear positive input, and not liking negative input. So I say normal people, right? Everybody. That's everybody. Everybody walks around wanting to hear nice things, right? And so many of the mental, like so much suffering comes, right? There's people get so upset when somebody says something negative towards you. Right? I'll go through the whole list, right? So that's one set of, each of these are sets of 2. So it's liking or being attached to hearing praise or pleasant words, and disliking hearing negative words. The other one is liking to be comfortable and disliking to be uncomfortable. Right? Or you could say liking pleasure and disliking discomfort. Another one is liking to have a good reputation, or like to be and to have a good reputation, let's say, and disliking having a bad reputation. And the other one is liking to gain or win and disliking to lose stuff or lose a competition, a loss in general. So you check up, this is part of Buddhist psychology, right? But you have to check for yourself. But if you check, right, what the idea here, actually, if you look honestly, actually if most of us look honestly, it's true, that most of what we've done in our lives up to now is that, actually, right? Or is this motivated by that? We started this meditation saying let's motivate by love and compassion, right? But if you check, right, when you're going around day to day, right? First of all, so much of what we do is motivated by those things. And secondly, if you check on what causes you suffering or what creates problems in your life, right? For sure, most of it comes from those, from the way, from relating to the world based on those motivations. And actually, I'm just, can people see that? Or is it hard to, I'm just asking, like, can people see that? Or does it seem like, no, the problems have nothing to do with that? Like liking to be comfortable and dislike, that would be my one with the water, right? I want to be comfortable and I don't like discomfort. Right? Or if somebody says something to you, if you go into work and somebody, actually, a lot of times it's actually this one of praise or positive input, it actually doesn't even have to be verbal, right? Actually, you check for yourself. You watch your own psychology, right? Like, so if you walk, let's say every day you walk by somebody at work, right, or someplace, right, and they smile at you, and then one day they look at you just like this, right? And then what happens in your mind, right? Like, so they don't even have to say a word, right, but just their facial expression, right? So like, it's just the difference between that and that, right? Like, so if they smile at you and say, oh, hi, right, then immediately like there's like it's check, right? There's like an uplifting in your mind, right? There's some feeling of your mind like going up and feeling like lighter and happier, right? Then one day, if every day they do that, then one day you walk by and they do like that, right? So then what happens in your mind, actually, right? Like, so it depends on you, right? But you might think, right? Actually, some people you check, right? Some people, you might think something like this, right? Oh, why are they doing that? Do they not like me now? Did I do something? I don't think I did anything. It must be them. I know I'm pretty likable. My mom told me I was likable. How could they not like me? Like, what's wrong with that person? They don't seem very nice. I don't think I like them. Right? And then you elaborate on and on. You can make up all kinds of stories, right? Then you can think, well, when I walk by them, I'm not going to smile either. Like that. See if they like that, right? And then you can create all kinds, and then it can go on and on and on, right? And then if the person says, and it's amazing, right? The power of just tiny words, right? So and even just a person's tone of voice, right? We can totally, right? Where you can lose sleep over it that night, right? In other words, you can be feeling happy, right? And then especially if you get, let's say, if you have let's say somebody who you have a lot of attachment to, right? Like your spouse or family member, right? And then if you get home and they just say a few words, you say, "Hi, nice to see you," right? You're in a good mood or something. And then they say, leave me alone. Right? Immediately, right? So you were feeling happy, right? And then immediately, just those couple words, right? But leave me alone, right? Then your mind can go into all kinds of well, what the hell's wrong with them? And they're always like that, right? And then you can start elaborating. I don't even know why I care about that person. All kinds of things can happen, right? It's just from 3 words, though, right? So our minds create this huge elaborations, right? And actually, if you're not careful, right? Actually, you can make up humongous things, right? You can stay up all night. Actually, if it were more than 3 or 4 words, if it was a couple sentences, right? Then you can stay up all night, thinking about that, right? Actually, people do it all the time, right? At work or in your personal life, right? If somebody says something, right? Especially if they say if they're in a really bad mood and they say a few mean things to you, right? It can become a gigantic thing, right? And then the same thing, right? Let's say gain and loss, right? So, actually, it's amazing sometimes with gain and loss, right? Say, for example, you have somebody in your house, right? A worker or somebody, right? And then you can't find your favorite watch or some other item, right? What would happen in your mind, right? Somebody comes to your house, they're there doing something, and then you look for your watch and you think, it's gone. I can't find it anywhere, right? So then what would happen, right? Would you think, well, everything's impermanent, things come and go? Probably not, right? So you might think, right? What would happen, right? You would start elaborating all kinds of things, right? Wow, that person looked kind of shifty. I noticed in their eyes they didn't look very honest. I had an intuition about this. Now, what can I do about it, right? And then you might think, well, should I call the police? Should I call their boss? Should I do this? Should I do that, right? You could make up all kinds of things, and especially, and actually, the more you like that watch, right, then the more upset you would be. If it was like a what's it called? If it came out of a Cracker Jack thing or something, right? Then you say, oh, I don't care. But especially if it was one that you had a lot of if it was either cost a lot of money or had a lot of emotional significance to you, right? The more significance it has to you, the more investment you have in it, then the more you'll suffer, right? So actually we think, right, that by having that feeling of treasuring that watch, it makes us happy, right? But then actually, in this instance, it makes us suffer more, right? Until actually, and this is what happens, right? So first you have, actually, if you just take that example, right, the watch, right? So first you have this attachment to it, right? Then when you think it's gone, you get upset, right? Then you start to get angry oftentimes, right? If you really believe the person stole it, right? Then you start to get angry. Then you start to think, wow, how can I retaliate? What can I do to get them in trouble, make them suffer, right? Right? And eventually, actually, it can give rise to hatred, right? Actually, that's how all hatred starts, right? Usually hatred starts with, you think the other's harming you, right? So it's an idea, right? Then you think that person harmed me in some way. Oftentimes, it could be some small incident like this, or it could be it could be you have some strange belief, right, that people of a certain type are harmful, right? But then you can create all kinds of, actually all kinds of terrible behaviors come from that, even, don't they? Uh, and actually, I'll give one more with this gain and loss one, right? Like the same thing, right? With actually, take the example of money also. Often money is a very strange one, isn't it? Like, because actually, like nowadays, right? Money is mostly numbers on a computer screen, right? Most of the time. Now people like, or is this not? It used to be. I mean, of course, we saw pieces of paper, right? But sometimes it's pieces of paper, and more often it's numbers on a computer screen, right? And so, but the same thing, right? In other words, so if those numbers change, right, or if like, actually the pieces of paper look the same, right? $100 bill and a $1 bill look very similar, don't they? But it makes a big difference to us, right? But the point I'm getting at is this: is so your mind, right, like, creates so many thoughts, and then those thoughts give rise to feelings, right? And then those feelings can become so much suffering, actually, right? Like, whereas do you recognize that? I mean, huge suffering, right? Like, and actually, like, the worst sufferings that most of us experience in life come from these things, right? Like, in other words, like heartbreak, right? Like, in other words, that's this, right? In other words, you have an attachment, right? You expect the person to do a certain thing, they don't do it, and your heart's broken. Rage, right? Like rage and hatred, right? They come from these sources. Jealousy always comes from these sources, right? Somebody else gained and you lost, right? Or somebody else's reputation went up and your reputation went down in some way or something, right? It's either gain or loss or reputation, right? And then your mind starts to develop all that feeling of jealousy. And if we step back, and we're talking about it now, actually, right? But the point in this is we're not yet at how to transform the problems. We're just looking at how they develop, right, in these 8 worldly concerns. And so part of the contemplation with the 8 worldly concerns, right? Actually, before I get to the contemplation, I want to do also the comfort and discomfort. Right? I'll share a funny. It struck me last night. It was funny. I was thinking in October to go to see the Dalai Lama in New York. So I was looking up hotels, because I was thinking, okay, I bought a ticket to see the Dalai Lama. I thought, okay, I got to figure out some place to stay. So I was looking, and then there was one hotel that was like slightly cheaper. In New York, hotels are very expensive, right? So there was one that was slightly cheaper. But then I put in that one, and then it came up. It said bed bugs at that hotel, and I thought, oh, that's why it's cheaper. And then I thought, oh, definitely don't want to stay at that hotel. No way. I'm not staying at that hotel, no matter what. Right, and then I picked up this book to prepare. Then I thought, okay, I got to stop looking at the hotels. I'm wasting too much time. Got to prepare for class tomorrow. Let me look at Lama Zopa's book. So I opened it up, and Rinpoche's talking about when people come to Nepal, right? and Rinpoche's describing how, so Western people from Europe and America come to Nepal, and then he's saying, and they stay at the fanciest hotel in the entire country, right? Where in other words, almost every person, aside from the royal family practically, right? It's like almost everybody in Nepal would never, in their life, in other words, they live in that country their entire life, they'll never stay in that hotel, right? Not once, right? And they would fantasize, oh, how nice it would be to get to stay in that hotel. And he says, and that hotel has bed bugs. And he says, so the people who come from, so then like, he's saying, so the Nepali people, right, who, they're used to bugs, right, first of all, like in a different way than people from America, right? They're looking at that hotel and saying, wow, if I can stay there, it'd be so great. They said, then the American people come, right, and they say, oh, this place sucks. How could anybody live here? It's terrible. Like, it has bed bugs, and also they don't have a certain item. Whatever the shampoo doesn't smell the same as, and things like that, right? And and sometimes they saw a cockroach going across the floor, right? And then of course, like I remember I was there, right? If you visit Nepal, right there actually, like there's no many of the houses, or most people's houses, don't have, right? Like in other words, it's not a way to stop cockroaches. It's not designed that way. Like, so, the point is like, so is it the hotel that's different? Like, and Rinpoche points out, like, so many of the people, he grew up in Nepal, right? So he says many people are very happy, right? In other words, he was thinking of like people he grew up around, right? So, so one person can meet with a circumstance that would, to one person you say, oh, it's so uncomfortable, I can't bear it, right? Then somebody else at the same circumstance would say, this is awesome. So where does the problem arise, right? Like where is the problem? and I'm not trying to oversimplify it, right? If you're from, this is the part that's complicated though, right? So on the one hand, for sure you can't deny that the problem arises in somebody's mind, right? Whereas because both people have, in other words, the person who lives in a simple dwelling in Nepal, and then the person who came from Washington D.C. both have a human body, right? So for sure, and so there's not an inherent difference there, right? There's not an inherent difference, not like bed bugs care, right, where you're from, or cockroaches either, right? So definitely you have to admit that the problem arises in somebody's mind, right? You can't, in other words, you can't deny it. I'm just, in any of these examples, right? Whether it's the person looking like that, or whether it's the bed bug or something, right? And yet, right, if you're honest with yourself, just saying that, right, if I say, well, it just arose from my mind, does that make you feel 100% better? No, right, of course not, right? So just saying, oh, it's only in my mind, so like, that doesn't fix the problem in and of itself, right? It's a useful first step, right? In other words, if you don't recognize at all, if you never even think the problem arises from your own mind, I mean, then actually, I want to say this. Actually, that is an important step, but it doesn't solve the problem. I want to say why it's an important step. If you don't think it's an important step, right, then your idea of the solution is what, right? If somebody frowns at you, it would be, well, fire them, right? Get them fired. Right? If there's bed bugs, kill them all. Right? If it's not enough money, we'll have the most money. Have more money than everybody else, right? Like, in other words, if you don't recognize that your mind is participating, I want to give the analogy of that Shantideva. There's a famous, Shantideva, the Buddhist poet and master and philosopher and yogi, and great teacher. In his Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, he gives that famous analogy where he says, he's talking about patience versus getting angry, right? And he says, he's talking about how we have to learn patience, and you can't conquer all your enemies. You have to learn patience in your heart, right? And he says it's like somebody who steps on a thorn, right? And then, like one solution would be to lay leather. He says an ignorant person. He's using a metaphor here. He says an ignorant person would want to cover the entire earth with leather, and then he says a wise person puts on a pair of shoes. And it's a metaphor, right? For we have to learn to train our own mind. You can't conquer the entire world, right? One problem, though, is that I just think this is true. Is that Shantideva was using that as a sort of a silly example, right? Nobody in the world would try to cover. But of course, he never came to America. It's like it was before America, right? In the West, not just America, but in the West, we have this idea almost that we could cover the entire Earth, not with leather, but with concrete. Right? There's some kind of idea like that, right? But the idea, so the first step in recognizing my mind participates, right, is taking some responsibility back on myself. And saying the solution isn't to make everybody always smile at me. Right? Imagine if that was like your rule, right? Everybody in the world has to smile at me. Actually, totally, I'm just thinking like that. That would be the worst dictator in the world, actually, right? It would be insane, right? Like everybody has to always smile. And then what do you like? I don't know. Anyway. So you get the idea that totally wouldn't work, right? And I always have to win, right? It's insane, right? But that's actually like, so the idea here though is that there's a part of us, right? Our narcissism, I guess I'll call it, right? That wants the world to be that way, and the world is not that way. So the first step is that, right? Is to recognize, okay, I'm participating. I'm participating in creating these problems, right? My mind is participating. I'm playing a role in that. Because otherwise we just keep blaming the outside and trying to change it. Or trying to make it the way make it the outside world always be the way we want. But then I want to emphasize a second point, right? Which is, in Buddhist psychology, though, there's a recognition that just saying, okay, it's all in my mind doesn't make it go away, right? So the idea then is this, though, is that you use the problem, right, as it's existing, right? So in other words, if there's something that you don't like, right, you first have to take some responsibility. Okay, my mind is helping create that. But then the second step, right, is that you use your interaction with that problem to help yourself. Does that make sense? So then you can still be uncomfortable, right? But then the discomfort is leading to something positive. Does that make sense? And I want to make a comment about that also. Like the Sakya Pandita, a great Tibetan master, said, if you want to always be comfortable, forget about being wise. That the path to wisdom involves a lot of discomfort. And so it depends what your goal is in life, right? But the one thing that's definitely, first of all, so if you want to be happy, right, and if you want to gain, actually real happiness comes from a certain amount of wisdom, right? Then you have to be willing to engage with discomfort, actually. Does that make sense? And it's true, actually, right? So, and I guess what I want to get at is a little bit deeper level now, right? Is so let's say you're bothered by another person's behavior towards you. I'm just going back to that example. Right? So in this kind of training, right, in this way of transforming the problem into something meaningful, into happiness, right? Let's say, I'm going to go actually through, so the first step, right, before somebody's even started, right, then there's just this feeling that they frowned at me, how dare they, right? They're annoying, I wish they would go away, right? Then you say, okay, wait a second, my mind is participating in this, right? That's the first step, right? You start to recognize I'm playing a role, right? And then if you stay with it, actually, right, then you would start analyzing, so that doesn't get rid of the upset, right? But then you start to analyze, so why am I upset? In other words, I'm upset because the person did a facial expression like that, right? And then you start to, this is where, the Dalai Lama often says, right? When the Dalai Lama travels around, he says your enemy is your teacher, right? What does he mean by that, actually, right? Like, now we're getting into what he really means by that, right? So you start to say, well, why am I upset that they're frowning at me, right? Or that they said some harsh words to me, right? And then you start to analyze, well, why did they say harsh words to me, right? Whereas why did that person say something angry and belittling to me, right? And then you have to check, right? But there are only a few reasons why people do that, right? One is they're right. One is that you're really annoying, right? Well, that'd be really good to know, right? We don't want to ever admit that, right? In other words, I never want to admit that the reason they said harsh words to me is because I'm really annoying, right? But if that's true, wow, they're a very useful teacher, right? And wherever I go, like that would help me to know, right, that I have some annoying habit, right? So the first step would be, wow, whoever thinks that though, actually, right? It's very rare, right? It's very painful in a way, this discomfort to recognize that, right? But to say, wow, they said something mean to me because I'm kind of a jerk sometimes. Then they're really a great teacher, right? Then let's say it's not that though, right? Now, one is be careful though, right? Because your tendency is to think it's not that, right? Your tendency is to think it must be them, not you, right? But oftentimes it's true, right? In other words, oftentimes the reason people frown at us is because we're annoying them in some way, right? Because of our self-centeredness in some sense, right? But then let's say it's not that, right? Let's say, so then, if it's not that I've done something annoying or negative or harmful, right? Then chances are the other likely interpretation of why they're saying something harsh is that they're suffering, right? Whereas people don't usually frown and say harsh things because they're feeling blissed out. Right? So if it's not that I've been annoying, it's that they're suffering, right? And so then, if that person is suffering in some way and therefore they're frowning or therefore they're kind of lashing out, then if the Dalai Lama says, right, the enemy is my teacher. Right? The enemy is the best teacher, actually. That's what he said. So then, actually, what are they teaching, right? Well, first of all, I mean, if I'm willing to be a decent student, there are a few things. One is empathy, right? It's not always easy to empathize with somebody who's lashing out, but that's actually the basis. I mean, that is real empathy, isn't it? Let's say this. It doesn't. I mean, it's not a particularly exalted form of empathy if your best friend is complaining to you about the same stuff that you always complain about, and you go, yeah, I feel the same thing. Right? That's actually that's not particularly advanced form of empathy. Right? But so a kind of a deeper empathy comes through this, right? There's through being able to empathize with a person who's being difficult. Then, beyond empathy, there's compassion, right? And actually, if we agree with this idea, right, one idea that compassion is a useful thing, right? Well, who's more worthy of compassion than that person, right? I'm just giving two examples, right? Another one, actually, there's many benefits. Actually, there's so many benefits to the person saying something harsh. Actually, if you're willing to, if you're interested in wisdom, right? Another is that, like, why does it upset me? Again, like, one is maybe it upsets me because I don't want to admit I'm annoying. Another is because I'm not empathic. Another is I'm not practicing compassion, so I don't care that they're suffering, right? Actually, I don't, right? In other words, if I'm mad at them because they said something mean to me, that means I'm not practicing compassion at all, right? I'm practicing self-centeredness. I want everybody to be nice to me. Right? Wow, that's disappointing if we admit that to ourselves, right? It's true, though, isn't it? In other words, if somebody says something a little mean to me and I'm upset, it's because I'm not practicing compassion, I'm practicing self-centeredness, right? And I'm practicing a kind of pride, actually, arrogant, not pride like proud of myself, pride like arrogance, right? That, like, I think I'm somehow important enough that everybody should be nice to me, even though nobody experiences that, right? In other words, on the whole planet, there's nobody who who walks around and everybody's always nice to them. Right? So why did I have, so actually if I think, so this person was upset with me and now I can't sleep at night, actually analyze and say, what was I thinking? Right? Like, I thought everybody was supposed to smile at me and say, oh, you're so wonderful. Like, where did I get that idea? Right? So actually they're pointing out, and there's that interaction. And actually, if everybody were always nice to you, right, you would never learn that, would you? Whereas if everybody always said, oh, you look so great, and you're so sweet, and you're so wonderful, right? Actually, what that does is make you more and more, what's the word, arrogant. And actually, I'll say this too. Like, so, if you look at real life, right, yourself and at people you know, actually, like, learning that kind of empathy, right, learning to empathize with difficult people, never happens if you don't have people like that, right? Actually, it is true also. Like, there is a, let's say this. You don't become less arrogant through people always treating you nicely. Right? People who are humble, right, usually have had some difficult times in their life. And again, the same thing with wisdom, right? If you look at people who are genuinely wise, right, it didn't come because they always had a comfortable, they didn't get wise by hanging out in the jacuzzi with everybody praising them. It's definitely true, actually, right? And so, I want to be clear, now I want to say something else, though, just to be clear, though. This is not saying, also I just want to be clear, like, this is not saying seek out suffering or be masochistic, right? You get that? This is saying suffering happens naturally. It's part of being alive on this planet. And if you're in a human body on this planet, you're going to meet with difficult circumstances, right? And it's up to you, right, whether you take those circumstances as a path towards something meaningful or as a way to become more self-centered, more angry, more bitter, more jealous, more craving, right? That's a choice you have, and nobody else can force you to do anything with that. But you have the right and the ability to take any difficult circumstance and use it towards something meaningful. Does that make sense? At least, like, the people getting the idea there. And so, what I'd like to suggest we do now, I want to do a little contemplation about this, but actually I think first let's do an interactive exercise and then we'll do the contemplation. So the interactive exercise I just want to try with folks, actually I had two different ideas, but let's do this one. So the idea would be just for like, I don't know, like 10 minutes, 12 minutes, is break up into groups of just like, say about three people per group, so there's enough sharing. And what I want to ask people to do is this, because I believe that people here have had some experience with this, so that's why I want to start with that, is I want to ask people just to share with each other in the small groups an experience you had, right, where even if you resisted it, even if you didn't want to, you did actually, and I'm using the word learn, but I want to be clear, like, here I don't mean intellectually learn, I mean like learn something genuinely, experientially, but where you learn something through a difficult experience. Does that make sense? And it could be a difficult experience with somebody else, or a difficult experience just in life, like some hardship or something. But to share something, again, so I want to be clear though, it's not like I learned, it's like I really learned something about, like I learned how to be different, or I learned something about myself, or I learned something about life through this difficult interaction or this difficult experience. Any questions about the exercise? So that's what I asked you. So just go around and just take let's say 3 or 4 minutes each, right? Just to share an experience like that. Because I think it's useful to get each other's. This gets at what we're talking about, right? Whereas you already have some experience transforming problems. What we're trying to do is learn how to do that more often, or more skillfully. But okay, so go ahead and do that. Break up into small groups and just share a story. What I want to get into next is how to use. We're going to cover a lot of different things over the course of this whole set of classes, but I want to talk a little bit about contemplative meditations on this topic. And what that means is this, Lama Zopa points something out, right? Which is that, so if the thought that something is a problem arises, right? Or something being a problem depends on the label problem, right? That your mind has to see it as negative, right? If your mind doesn't see something as negative, then it's not a problem. And different people like different things, so what's a problem to you might be not a problem to somebody else, right? But so at a certain point something happens and then your mind says this is a problem, right? And so the thought, in other words, if you just stay with the thought this is a problem, this is really bad, and then you elaborate on that, nothing gets better, right? In other words, that just increases, that compounds your suffering. Does that make sense? So and that's obvious in these examples, right? So somebody says to you, wow, you're really stupid, right? So if you think, wow, they're really stupid to say I'm stupid, right? And then you think, and they're terrible to say, and then you keep going with that thought, and you just elaborate in various versions of it, you're just going to make yourself more and more unhappy, right? Just giving an example of what we're saying. So what Lama Zopa points out, which I think is very wise, is that you have, the point of intervention for yourself is to think a different way, right? So you start cultivating a different way of thinking. And then eventually, and at first it doesn't feel visceral, it doesn't feel real to you. But if you keep going and you do it enough, eventually it does start to feel real. Does that make sense? But that's what contemplative meditation is. And I want to say something about that just to be clear, is we're all good at contemplation. We're not just, the definition of meditation in Buddhism is cultivating a positive, habituating yourself to something positive. So we're not necessarily very good at contemplative meditation, but we're all good contemplators. It's just we contemplate sometimes the wrong things, right? Does that make sense? So if you contemplate, in my example I gave a minute ago, right? So if you contemplate, how dare they say that? I'm not stupid, and my teacher once told me I'm smart. How could they say that? And and also they're ugly, and they are, whatever, and I don't even like, how they dress, and right. If you do that over and over again, right? That's contemplation, right? You're contemplating the faults of that person, right? And what that's going to give rise to is anger, right? And you can go on, and then eventually you can think, and next time I see them, I'll say this, and they'll feel stupid. And if I say it this way in front of this person, then they'll really feel dumb, and wow. And I'll get off. I won't even look like I'll say it in a certain way where it won't even look like I'm being mean. It'll seem like I'm just mentioning something, but they'll, and then therefore, I'll look nice, and they'll look, really bad. Because if I said it too overtly, then it would seem like I'm being mean. But I'm not mean, I'm nice. So I'm going to say it in a way that looks nice but hurts their feelings. Right? If you do that, right, that's excellent contemplation, but it's not contemplative meditation. It's contemplating anger, right? It's contemplation to give rise to hatred, actually, is what that is, right? And we're also good contemplators at anxiety, right? Anxiety is a form of contemplation, but it's not contemplative meditation. It's not healthy, right? So whereas what we're really good at that, right? This could go wrong, that could go wrong, and then if this goes wrong, then this will become difficult, and that will become, and wow, 5 things could go wrong at the same time, and then that would be really terrible, and right, and then you can give rise to a lot of, and that's a form of contemplation, right? But it's not healthy. So I'm pointing out that, and because sometimes when people start to contemplative meditations, they say, well, it doesn't feel real to me. It doesn't feel visceral, right? Well, and what I want to say is this: that's because, let's say this right, what feels real to you is what you're used to, right? There is any way of thinking that you habituate yourself to starts to feel very visceral, right? Sometimes when people if we teach the contemplations for giving rise to compassion, right? And then people say, well, I did that contemplation twice, and I don't know, I didn't feel much. Because you're not used to feeling compassion, so it's hard for you. In other words, so do it more. That's the idea, right? Whereas, like, for example, anger. Well, if somebody says, "Oh, you check for yourself, right? Anger or jealousy or craving, right? Actually, most of us are very good at, we're really good at generating craving, right? You think, oh, if I had this, it would be like this, and then this, and then that, and it's so great, and it would be so wonderful, and then I'd be happy, and right? And then you go out and buy it or whatever. We're good at that, right? Because, but sometimes we're not good at contemplative meditation, right? Which means cultivating a virtuous or a healthy or a state of mind that gives rise to us. And in Buddhism, virtuous doesn't mean I want to be clear, it means it makes you happy in the long run. That's all that means. It's not, virtuous means realistic and makes you happy, okay? And what Buddhism is saying is that states of mind that are genuinely realistic and that make you happy are positive states of mind, right? So craving's not one of those, right? Craving for something doesn't make you happy in the long run, and it doesn't bring peace of mind. Does that make sense? So, first, it's something that makes your mind peaceful and that's realistic is a healthy state of mind. So virtuous doesn't mean somebody you should be like this. It means something like that. Really, if you're introspective, you see your mind becomes peaceful through that. Does that make sense? And kind, things like that. So, anyway, I just wanted to say. So then contemplative meditation. So I say. So if at first it doesn't feel visceral, that's a sign that you just haven't done it much. So don't think. If you try to cultivate do some contemplative meditation, you say, well, it doesn't feel real to me yet. Well, that's just a sign that you're used to something. So for example, if you're trying to cultivate inner tranquility, right? And you say, well, I don't know, anxiety is a lot easier for me. That's just because that's what you've spent your time doing is cultivating anxiety. And that's fine. It's not judgmental, but it's then the solution is to keep thinking differently. Does that make sense? So I want to give an example now, I'm going to follow Lama Zopa Rinpoche's approach on this because I think he teaches it so beautifully. But so the idea is, right, is that we only think of the faults of problems, right? But he says somewhere, this quote, something like, if you start to contemplate the advantages of problems, then eventually, he's getting at this visceral quality. He says, eventually, the thought of enjoying problems will arise like the thought of enjoying ice cream. Which I thought I like ice cream, so it's a funny quote. But then it'll become visceral and natural, but that takes time. Does that make sense? So the idea, I want to go in, and at first it seems funny to do these things, but I want to share because I think it's the only way to get there. It's the only way to really change. And so I want to give an example, I want to share, let's look at an example of how to cultivate this idea of transforming problems, right, through contemplative meditation. And contemplative meditation doesn't mean you have to sit like this, right? It just means thinking and cultivating a healthy state, right? You can do it sitting like this, but you can also do it, when you're laying in bed at night or on your drive or at work. It's just how you're thinking, right? It's good to do some sitting up, to train, to habituate yourself, but then if you only do it then, that's not enough. Right? So let's take the example of, we'll do a couple of examples, but let's take the example of somebody not liking you, and therefore, treating you badly, right? So treating you disrespectfully, let's say, right? Because they don't like you. Right? So, on the one hand, from the 8 worldly dharmas approach, right? The idea, right? Our narcissistic idea is everybody should like me and treat me nicely. Right? And there's no doubt, actually, all of us have that habit, right? All of us have a wish, an idea, right? That it's hard, it's funny. It's so natural to us, and yet if you say it out loud, it seems so stupid. It's funny. It's an odd paradox or something, right? In other words, on the one hand, of course, if you don't analyze it, of course I feel like everybody should like me and treat me nicely. I'm so nice, right? But then if you say it out loud, it sounds so stupid, right? That's because delusions aren't realistic. This Buddhist, there is a basic Buddhist idea, right? Is that we have all these deluded ideas that we're habituated to, right? That we don't want to analyze and admit, right? But once we admit them to ourselves, then we can start working on them, right? So I'm starting off with this idea. Okay, so I think everybody should like me and treat me nicely. And certainly nobody should treat me very badly. Maybe a tiny bit every now and then, but mostly nice. Every now and then somebody can say a little thing or something, but mostly they should, and then they should apologize and say, that's, I guess, that's probably mine or something like that, right? But then you start to contemplate, right? So the contemplation is this, So I'm going to give an example of how one might start contemplating. So okay, so then imagine that, so each of us can imagine, right, that somebody doesn't like me and says something harsh to me. Right? So at first, like, of course, right, if I really imagine that viscerally, imagine that it's somebody who you, imagine for a moment that it's somebody who you, what's the word, you care about what they think, right, and also maybe you've been nice to them, right, then it hurts worse. If you've been nice to them and then they treat you badly, that often hurts worse. Right? So here's the contemplative meditation then. Is you actually start, you don't just, or is you elaborate, I'm just giving an example, right? But you might start to think, okay, so I'm upset, right? I was nice to them, and then they treated me badly, and they don't like me. So then you start to think, so if you only think, right, this is what I started with, if you only think the disadvantages of that, right? If you only think, well, that's not good, I'm more happy if people treat me nice, and they're a jerk for treating me badly, and I was nice to them, and how dare they, right? That's only going to make you more and more unhappy. So now we shift, right? So this is so I'm just making it clear. So now we're shifting. So you imagine that you're in that state, and then you start to do the contemplative meditation. So you think, wait a second. Like, I went to a class once on transforming problems. Maybe I read a book about it or something. And you think, okay, I'm going to try to use this. Right? Use this to change my habit of mind. Right? And so then you might start to think, right? Well, first of all, I, right, was kind of prideful or arrogant, thinking everybody should like me and treat me nicely. Actually, when I think of the best people on the entire planet, right, not everybody likes them, right? Like the Dalai Lama, right? Chinese government, huge, they hate him, right? Like Nelson Mandela, right? He was thrown in jail for like decades, right? Like, but everybody should like me? Like, wow, that's weird. Where did I get that idea? Like, even the Buddha, right? Like, or the Buddha was, like, his cousin couldn't stand him, right? Jesus was killed, right? Like, but everybody should like me? Like, wow, that's weird. Like, where did I get that idea? And so somebody doesn't like me. Okay, wow, that seems reasonable. Because I'm not nearly as nice as those people, right? So maybe it's okay that somebody doesn't like me. Then, like, maybe people have reasons not to like me, right? So you're starting to contemplate, right? Like, and also, like, I'll never see those reasons, actually, because I hate looking at my faults. Like, I really like thinking about all my good qualities. And I hate thinking about when I have flaws. But actually, I need to see my flaws, or I'm never going to grow, right? I say I'm interested in some kind of, like, inner growth, or psychological development, or spiritual growth, right? But actually, like, I'm never, ever going to grow unless I see my flaws. Right? I hate looking at them, but that's true. And actually, like, all the people who really, like, think I'm wonderful and never tell me my flaws. Right? So I need this person. Like, and actually, this person might be very helpful to me if I listen to them, because they're seeing some flaws in me that I'm not wanting to look at. So, actually, maybe I should be open to them. Right? Actually, like, so now you keep going. I keep going, right? So, actually, like, also, if I look at good human qualities, right? Like, I want to be a humble person, right? But if I'm upset this person doesn't like me, I must not be that humble, right? Because if I were humble, that would be not a surprise, right? Because humble people don't think everybody should like them. I must be kind of arrogant. I must be exaggerating my own good qualities. So maybe I should listen to that person. And then also, right, so you say it, like, confidence. I want to talk about, like, so I'm contemplating now, right? Like, there is, if I think everybody has to like me and everybody has to treat me nicely, I must not be very confident that I can deal with life, actually, right? Like, whereas I must, like, think I'm afraid, because the reality of this planet, if I look around, is people go through all kinds of terrible experiences, right? And I've been lucky lately. I live in a place where it's not terrible, right? There are people who live in places with horrific things happening, right? And so, like, I must be really fearful if I'm, like, can't even deal with somebody frowning at me and saying a few mean words. Like, how am I ever going to develop confidence if I can't face this person? They're not shooting me. They're not, like, throwing grenades at my house or something, right? Like, if I can't practice with some confidence with them and feel okay, how am I ever going to be okay in this world, right? Where there are people, like, who do all kinds of things. There are all kinds of terrible things that happen. And how am I ever going to, like, if I want to live a life of, like, kindness or love or compassion or a life of meaning and integrity, well, if I can't face this little challenge of somebody, let's say, in my personal life or in work, treating me badly, how am I ever going to feel comfortable in the world to go out and do something more, like, to take on challenges if I can't take on this challenge, right? I mean, luckily, they're not stabbing me. I should start with them, build up to, like, harder people. Wow, like, this is an opportunity to build my confidence, actually, in life, and to be a more confident, forthright, like, open-hearted person, right? And again, like, if I want to practice open-heartedness, right? Well, actually, it doesn't really count. Whereas if I'm open-hearted to the people who, like, are rubbing my head, that's not, like, I don't know, is that a genuine open-heartedness? Am I doing it just, like, because I'm, or they're giving me money, or giving me praise, or giving me vacations, or whatever, like, there's, I don't know, can I really be confident that I'm practicing something genuine? Actually, if I can practice with this person, then I can be confident that I'm doing something, at least. In myself, I don't have to tell anybody else, but in my heart, I can know. Because if I'm being nice to somebody who, like, is being nice back to me, that's good, but I don't really know if I'm doing it. It's hard to admit it's hard to know in my heart. Am I doing that because they're nice to me, or am I doing it because I'm being genuinely loving? But if I can be loving to that person when they're doing that, well, then at least I know I have a moment of genuine love in my life. That's something meaningful before I die. This person is, like, so precious, actually, right? Like, whereas, like, right now, that for my goals in life, right, for developing and being a better person and being a more kind person, being a more open-hearted person, being a more loving person, like, this person is the most precious one, actually, right? Whereas all those people who treat me nicely, they're precious and wonderful too, but actually for me they're not as useful, really, in terms of, like, feeling confident that I'm actually doing something meaningful. And also, even for the people who I right now, because actually I'm pretty immature, and if those people who are treating me nice, if they start saying something mean, then I won't like them either, actually, right? Like, then I'll be upset with them. And, like, so I'm not a very good, friend or family member or partner. Whereas if I can't practice with this person, because then when they come, like the person who I right now think is so wonderful, well, they're not always going to like me, right? Sometimes they're going to be in a bad mood and treat me badly. And I'm not going to be a very good friend to them if I can't be nice to this person, right? So even if I'm just caring about my own, whatever, parents or children or spouse or something, right? If I can't practice with this person, how am I going to practice with them, right? Because I have bigger expectations with them, if it's not them that we're talking about here, right? But so, like, even if I just want to be kind to the people who I care about, I have to practice with this person. Otherwise, I'm just going to be like, what's the word? Only treat people nice when they treat me nice, and then treat people bad when they treat me bad. That's like, then I'm no better than a gangster. That's what gangsters do, right? They treat people good when they treat them good, and they treat people bad. Like, so this is the person who's actually my main benefactor, right? I feel so happy to engage with them. And it's not that I'm happy to engage with them because I think I can manipulate them into treating me nicely. I hope they keep telling me bad things, but I'll just keep being nice to them and, like, listening to them and seeing what I can learn either about myself or about compassion and kindness to them. I can't wait to interact with them. Like, wow, it'll be exciting. Even if it'll be like, and even my suffering, right? Because if they treat me badly, I have a habit, right? It's not that my suffering is going to go away, right? But now I'll be able to see it clearly. Does that make sense? So it's not that I think, oh, then next time I interact with them and they treat me badly, let's say again, that I'm going to be just blissed out. But, like, I'll be happy to feel unhappy, because then I'm seeing what's real in myself, right? I'm seeing my sense of self-importance and of rage or of anger and, like, how am I going to grow if I don't see that? So, okay, I'm going to go engage with them. And, like, one starts to feel some sense of enthusiasm for that. Does that make sense? Like, how you can, or is that one has to think over and over, and then let's say you do that, right? And finally you feel, yeah, I do want to engage with them in kindness, right? And then 5 minutes later you think, well, not really, right? Well, then you start again. Well, why not really? Actually, that's the avoidance. It's like you see it, right? When you think, like, you contemplate like that. You think, yeah, I want to engage with them with kindness, right? Then, like, a half hour later, you think of them again. And you think, I can't stand that, right? Well, then you realize, oh wow, look at me. Like, I've gotten so good at contemplating that other way that arises spontaneously, where it takes so much effort to give rise to a healthy mind, right? So that's fine. That's how I am. It's just a habit, right? So I can change my habit. So again, I'm going to start contemplating. Wow, it's so lucky, And even now they're helping me. Even they're not here, they're helping me, right? I just saw something about myself, my habit of being negative, right? And they're benefiting me. Actually, and this is another contemplation. Actually, like, they're helping me, and I'm harming them, right? Whereas, because they're not getting this out of it, right? Like, in other words, unless they happen to be, but good chance, right? Maybe they're at home. That poor person is at home thinking, wow, I don't like that person. I have to work with them. I have to see them this week at work. They're, last time because maybe I was annoying back, right? Then I have to see them, and they're going to, like, they even feel nervous to come to work, right? And they're not using that to transform themselves. So then you think, wow, I'm harming them, my presence, right? Because they're just feeling angry, whereas they're helping me. I owe them big time, right? You said, like, you could contemplate it, right? And then again, you give rise to a sense of what's the word? Positivity. And then if you forget, then again it comes back to negative. But the point is, if you keep doing that, eventually that becomes your natural response. And then about that, so that's one example of how you would contemplate. And I want to share a brief story, and then I'll give another example. The brief story I want to share was of a couple of you, I think Gabe, you've heard this before, but it's a story of one Tibetan Lama, Geshe Lama Kunchok. And actually, if anybody, I don't know if a couple of you have probably seen it, there's a movie called The Unmistaken Child that's about his reincarnation. He died, and that's his reincarnation. But many years ago, I was in Nepal, and Lama Zopa was asking different people to tell their biographies, like to come up and tell their life story. And so everybody else just told their life story. He asked Geshe Lama Kunchok to do that, and Geshe Lama Kunchok didn't want to. But Lama Zopa is hard to say no to, because he founded the monastery and everything, or he co-founded. So anyway, so he asked again. So Geshe Lama Kunchok came in, and he taught on the 8 worldly dharmas, actually. So he came in and he said, Lama Zopa asked me to tell my life story. And then he said, well, my life story is that it's better to be blamed than to be praised, and it's better to lose than to win, and it's better to have discomfort than comfort. And then he said I used to he said when he came out of Tibet, right, he was a refugee, right, so he'd grown up in Tibet, and then they were, of course the Chinese army came and he escaped, right, and then he went in retreat in Nepal, and he said it was great. It's wonderful. He said I would he was in retreat under a tree, so the rain would fall on him, right? And then his hair grew really long, and people thought he was some kind of demon, because he was sitting under a tree with long hair. And so he said then people would throw stuff at him, and like try to chase him away and insult him, and say like, get out of our village, you're ugly, you're horrible, you're a demon, and they would throw things at him. Right? And he said, so that was great for my practice. He said, I was really happy then. He said, now I'm here, and you Western people come and you want to give me presents. He said, that's terrible. And then he gave some other examples, like he said it was, and he said, and then I had nothing. It's great. He was like, now I have a couple bowls in my room, like I have to give them away. Like he had almost nothing, right? But he had a couple things. He said, now I have 2 sets of robes. Then I only had a robes. He was a monk, right? So then he only had robes that like had holes in them or something. Then now people would give him extra stuff. He said, what use do I have for something like that? Anyways, I don't remember all the details, but so he said like that. So this was funny. So then after he said, so he basically said, so learning how to do that, that's what's meaningful. Like then you're practicing spirituality, and if you don't equalize gain and loss, then it doesn't have much meaning. Or something like that. And I thought it was funny. Then somebody in the audience raised their hand and asked a question. They said, well, that's cool, but like I'm going back to America, and how do you like? Can you share how to practice that in our cultural context? And he just said something like, well, either you equalize it or you don't. It's up to you. Either you transform your mind or you don't. It's your own choice. Right? Do whatever you want. Here's like, next question. So he said something like that. And my point is this: we don't. He was an extreme, in some ways an extreme example, right, of a yogi. But the point I want to make is this: is in any given moment, right? First of all, it was 2 things. One is, how did he get that way? Right? It was just through these contemplations, right? Whereas the point I'm getting is this: is he was happy. What struck me about him was that he was happy regardless of whatever happened to him, right? Whereas like, I was saying that issue of confidence earlier. I mentioned that, right? Whereas like, there was a quality of confidence and fearlessness with it, right? Because whereas whether you like said, oh, that was the most wonderful teaching, and thank you, and here's an envelope with some kind of silk scarf, or if you had spit on him, like, it wasn't going to affect his happiness, right? I remember being struck by that, and that wasn't like an intellectual idea for him. He had lived under a tree and people had thrown stuff at him, and he was happy. There's this quality of like, what's the word? Happy regardless of circumstances, that only comes through this kind of contemplation. And he had achieved that. He wants to actually share that. That was interesting. He once he didn't tell this story, but Lama Zopa shared it once, that when Geshe Lama Kunchok was old, before he died, he once fell down steps, and as he was hit, he was old, right? And as his body was hitting, he told Lama Zopa this, that as his body was hitting the pavement, he was thinking, may those who benefit others live long, something like that. That was his natural thought, was love. Wow, his mind was so trained that no matter what happened to him, he was always cultivating love. And anyway, so my point is this: so we can contemplate. If we contemplate, right, and we may not be able to right now, live under a tree or something, but the point is that we can in any given moment be like that. Does that make sense? In other words, so somebody, something can go wrong in your house, right? And either you could be upset or you can be happy, right? And it's possible to be either one, right? Somebody can treat you badly and you can be upset or you can be happy. Maybe you can't transform your mind in one moment, right? But if you cultivate this, you can achieve that, right? You can achieve a level where somebody can insult you and you think, cool, that's interesting, right? Or where something can break or your car can get stolen and you can think, it wasn't really my car. In other words, that's possible. Anybody can achieve that. You see what I'm getting at? So we may not be able to do, we may not be able to next year be at the level of that Tibetan Lama, but we can have moments like that, right? And more moments. And that's all practice is, right? Is you have more moments, and then and the point is that you're happier and happier, right? That's the point here. If something good happens, you're happy, and if something bad happens, you're happy. Does that make sense? That's this idea of equalizing gain and loss, or praise and blame. So that actually, if somebody praises you, right, actually you can have the thought, right. In other words, if you were practicing like this, right. So if somebody praises you, what do you think? In other words, it's not that you don't take the compliment, right, but there's a recognition. Well, that's their perspective in this moment. Right? That's okay. In other words, it's not like you think, oh, that's terrible, right, that they're saying something nice. So you just recognize that's their experience in this moment. Maybe because I was nice to them just now. Whatever. Good. Right. But it doesn't last. It's not something permanent, and it's not something inherent to you, right? We often feel when somebody says, "Oh, you're so wonderful," right? Either some people reject that and think, "Oh no, that's not me," right? And other people sort of get very attached to it and think, "Oh, that." And the idea with this is that you just you recognize it's just sounds, in a way, and it has some meaning. In other words, and if it means something between us in that moment, fine. But it's not something to grasp onto. Does that make sense? They're not always going to think that, and it's not always going to be. And it may or may not, first of all, may or may not be true, and secondly, they're not always going to think that. So it's not something to grasp at, it's just a momentary thing. And the same with criticism, right? There's it's not something inherent, it's not something permanent, and it may or may not be helpful, but it's not something to be, to grasp at too much. Does that make sense, kind of? But I want to give another, let's do one more example of a contemplation, because this is actually the training, right, as you contemplate. So, I'm trying to think which example to use, whether people prefer loss or discomfort. Anybody have a preference? I don't know. Pick one. We're trying to go through a couple of the 8 worldly dharma. Was that loss? Okay. So, yeah, let's take the example of loss, right? So, again, actually, it's interesting, right? From the 8 worldly dharmas perspective, right? Which I would call also, another way of calling that is the worldly perspective, another way of calling it is a narcissistic perspective, right? From that perspective, actually, I'll say it this way. From that perspective, one's ego always wants more, right? Whereas it's endless, isn't it? Whereas then that's true, actually, right? So in other words, because actually nobody's ever, it's a true psychological phenomenon, right? Whereas when you're in that mode, nobody ever has enough, right? And it's true, actually, right? Whereas you watch people around here, if somebody gets a promotion, right? They feel happy, they get a raise, right? They feel happy, right? But then there are two things. Either they think, well, that wasn't a big enough raise, right? It was a raise and that's good, but I should have gotten more. Or if they think it's enough, right? Then it's enough, they feel excited, right? And then after a little while they think, well, when am I going to get my next raise, right? And actually, everybody's like that, right? Like in other words, or if it's not a raise, then it's something else, right? Like in other words, I want my stocks to go up, or I want something else. Like, whereas everybody wants something more of whatever it is they crave after, right? So it depends what you crave after, but whatever you crave after, you want more and more of it, right? Lama Tsongkhapa said that. He said, craving and desire don't lead to satisfaction; they lead to more craving and desire, which is psychologically true. And so that's the nature of craving and desire, actually, is that they always lead to wanting. So if you cultivate a mind craving after something, actually you have the idea, when I get that, then I'll be satisfied, right? But the reality is that what you get is the habit of cultivating craving and desire. Does that make sense? And if you don't get that object, then you have craving and desire with like an intense suffering of not getting what you want. And if you do get what you want, right, then what you get, because you've cultivated the habit of craving, is then you start to want something else. Right? And so in terms of loss, right, so that's not another person now, let's assume. Let's assume it's just something, you lost some money or object, right? So actually the idea here, right, is so you lose something, right? So the old habit, right, the eight worldly dharmas habit, the narcissistic habit, the egocentric habit, right, is to think, actually you don't think this, but again, I'm just pointing it out, is pointing out what's the underlying thought. You don't consciously admit it, right? But the underlying thought is, I should always have what I want, and I should have more and more. And actually, ideally, I should never die and just keep getting more forever. Right? That would be the ideal narcissistic fantasy, right? And so when you lose something, right? Actually, the first thing, right? So there's immediate this like mind of suffering, and sometimes actually, right, the suffering can be so intense, right? People kill themselves, right? That happens, right? Or like during economic crisis, people kill themselves, right? Wow, the suffering, like when people lost so much, right? Like with those scams, right? You see people, but actually, even us, right? I mean, if you lose like the hundreds of I had a friend who lost a lot of money, and it can be so upsetting, right? If you get like scammed, but actually, even just like if somebody rips you off for $10, right? You can be upset. You can get we can get so upset, actually, right? Isn't it true? Right? In other words, like in that moment, right? Or $5, right? Like if somebody overcharged you or something, or they gave you the wrong soup when you left the place or whatever, or something like, or just like, or if somebody stole something, just $2 from you if they stole it, right? You can get like your mind can get so upset, right? And so the idea here, right, is again, first of all, you would pause, right? So your mind starts to get upset like that. So if you're going to contemplate, then you start to contemplate. Right? Actually, okay, I'm upset that I lost this object, right, or this money, or whatever it is. So actually, I'm upset not because the first thought is I'm upset because I lost that money, right? Like I'm going to use the example of money just to make it easy for language. Right? I think I'm upset because I lost that money. I'm not upset because I lost that money. Actually, if I start to contemplate, I'm upset. What's that we say? Because I was grasping at that money and I thought it was mine, right? And now I think it's not mine, right? It was the grasping in my mind that actually makes me upset, right? In other words, and the proof of that is this: is like if every day somebody else loses money and I don't get upset, right? Like whereas every day there are people who are losing all kinds of things, and that doesn't particularly upset me that much, right? It's because my ego sort of identified this is mine, like so. There's an I, right? I feel that this is me and that's mine, right? And then if somebody takes it, I feel almost like I'm less, right? Like I've lost part of me. I've lost part of what I identify with my identity, right? That's my stuff. And the idea here is this: is as you start to contemplate, right? You think, wow. So actually, according to Buddhist psychology, you have to check my own experience if this is true, but actually, I think it is, right? Is that so much of my suffering, right? Most of my suffering actually comes from grasping at this sense of mine, right? In other words, with people, right? If I start to think this person's my partner, right? Then I put all kinds of projections on them, and actually I make so much problems for them, right? When I think this stuff is mine, right? Then actually it creates so much suffering, right? If I look at my own process, actually, right? actually, I'm using the example of money. Okay, so actually my relationship to that, when it comes from these eight worldly dharmas approach, is almost all suffering, right? In other words, I start off wanting something I don't have, right? I want to have this much money so I can retire, or so I can buy a house or whatever, right? So then there's like so much craving of wanting that, right? Then there's like a lot of hardships trying to get that. Right? Then sometimes I don't get what I want, right? Then I finally, if I do get some money, right? Then what happens, right? Then I'm afraid, actually, right? And there is mostly it leads to some kind of feeling of fear. Well, what if I lose it, right? Where am I going to put that money? You know, if it's just a little bit of money, is it safe in my wallet? What if I'm in a bad neighborhood, right? Then I'm worried about that. If it's a larger amount of money, actually people have all kinds of stress, right? Like they hire people to tell them, where should I put my money, right? And then like, sometimes they tell them the wrong thing, then they're angry at the person, right? And then like, if I leave it, actually watch people's mind, right? Let's say it's money, right? If I put it in the bank, well then I'm not getting any interest, right? Other people are getting more interest than me. That's terrible, right? And then like, if I put it in the stock market, I could lose it, right? And if I like, or maybe I'll make a lot if I put it in the stock market, maybe I'll lose it, right? Maybe if I go to Vegas, well then I'll probably lose it. You know, it's like, so actually it's a problem, right? Like in other words, if you don't have money, it's a problem, but then if you're, from this eight worldly dharma's point of view, if you have money, it's also a problem, right? And then like, if somebody, what's there to say it? Like, so if somebody scams me, or if this, you know, like if I put it in the stock market and it goes down, like then I'll be totally miserable, right? That's terrible, right? Because I worked so hard to get it. And now if I lose it from that, right? But then if I don't put it in the stock market and the market goes up, then I'll be upset, right? Because I was stupid and I didn't put it in the market. My point is like, I'm just giving you an example, right? Like, so it's all problem actually, right? All like, but the problem is my way of relating to that, right? And so, here's the trick though, right? So if I'm contemplating, right? As long as what I have is going up, actually I never think about it, right? I'm just thinking, oh, this is wonderful, right? And I don't notice my suffering, right? I don't notice that I'm worrying, well, what if it goes down, right? If you talk to somebody, right? I talk to somebody sometimes, they bought a stock, right, and it went up, right? Actually, even that's a suffering, right? The stock and went up, but when do I sell it? It could keep going up. And if it keeps going up and I sell it now, oh, that would be terrible. I could have retired. I could have like gotten a house in the Bahamas. But if it turns and goes down, and I would have made, you know, I could have sold it for this much, and then it's like worth half as much, that would be terrible. What do I do? Like, I don't know whether to sell it. And either way is going to be a problem, right? And I want it, ideally, I would sell it at the exact peak, right? That's what everybody's, like, which is what? Like, an insane fantasy of, actually, the idea there is the fantasy that I'm somehow omnipotent, actually, or omniscient, or I'm like God or something. I know that. It's insane, right? Like, so actually, the whole relationship in this way, from the early dharmas, right, of gain and loss, is all suffering, right? Whereas if I don't have money, I'm suffering. If I have, if the money's going up, I'm suffering. If it's going down, I'm suffering, right? It's just different kinds of suffering, actually, right? But both of them are suffering, actually, right? And then, like, you know, actually, actually, it's amazing if you watch, actually, right? Because if you watch people, right, then like even if it goes up, right, then let's say it goes up to a certain level, right? They have this much money. Then they think, well, you know, then I could retire, but is that enough to retire, right? And would I be happy if I retired? Maybe maybe I'll be bored, right? Like, in other words, if I didn't have the money, then I wouldn't have to worry about whether I should retire. You know, then I could just relax and work. But now I have to worry, can I retire soon, or should I keep working so I could have more, and I know if I live to 100 that I'll be okay. Right? I'm just pointing out, like, this is what happens actually in people's minds, right? You know, and then also, like, people know, right, actually, you know, in some countries, right, you've seen, I mean, we all know this, right? Somebody can have all this money, and then what's the word? If the economy completely changes, then the money has no value, right? So in the back of people's mind, they know, even if I have, like, millions of dollars, right? Well, it's possible, the money could eventually, you know, in our lifetime, it's possible, we know it's happened in other countries, it could happen here, right? Then the money could be useless. Then what? I worked all that time, and I invested, and I watch it, and then it's worth nothing? Oh my God. Then people jump out a window or something, right? From the eight worldly dharmas, right? That's the eight worldly dharmas. And the point is this, so then you think, right, so if you're contemplating, right, so you think, okay, so today, just like, let's say I lost $100 or something, somebody stole it, or whatever it would be, right? Then you would think, wow, good. Like, that's my only teacher, right? Whereas as long as it's going up, it never strikes me. I never realize it. Even though I'm suffering when it's going up because I'm worried it's going to go down, or I'm worried somebody's going to take. Like actually, at those times, I don't really admit to myself it's a problem, right? Now I lost something. Let me stop here and look, right? And realize, wow, first of all, like actually it's a teacher in many ways, right? First of all, I'm going to die and lose everything eventually. And all this thought about, like, is it going up and is it going down, and that, actually, there's no recognition of mortality in that, right? Whereas I could die tomorrow, and who cares, actually, right? And all the time I spend thinking about wealth or something like that, right? Actually, when I die, will that have any value? Definitely not, right? Whereas it was a complete way. Whereas, there's, everybody knows that. You learned that as a child when you saw A Christmas Carol, right? Whereas we all know, right? When you're a little kid and you see A Christmas Carol and you see Scrooge, actually, when you're in the eight worldly dharmas mode, you're Scrooge, actually, right? Whereas Scrooge is not some external person. Scrooge is an expression of us, right? Whereas the reason we relate to that story is we're him, right? So there is when I'm relating to money in that way, I am Scrooge, actually, right? Whereas I'm worrying and I'm thinking and I'm like, even if it's and it doesn't matter if it's $1 million or it's $10, right? It's a state of mind, right? Of grasping and of holding on to something that actually has no inherent value, right? Like in other words, we already said that the economy crashes and it's worth nothing, right? Also, it's just numbers, right? And it's always relative, And the point here is, right, that the loss. So if I lose something, it's like that's the time. That's actually the best time to stop and say, wow, how am I relating to my stuff, right? In other words, it's causing me so much suffering. It's true, actually, right? Even if you have, like, put aside money, right? Even if you have a, say you have a smartphone, right? So then, like, there's all kinds of, right? Do you put a lock, like the locking feature? Do I put the locking feature or not? Well, if I don't, if I do put the locking feature, it's inconvenient to me, right? If I don't, then if somebody steals it, they'll get my stuff, right? Everything, I'm just pointing out, everything we have, we relate to in this way of, like, grasping, right? And as long as we're relating it to it in that way, right, we suffer, and there's no way around it, actually. In other words, it's the nature of that kind of relationship to our stuff, by its very nature, is suffering, right? And I went through that, right? When you don't have it, when you're trying to get it, when you have it, if you lose it, if you don't lose it, then again, you become dissatisfied and you want more. It's always going to lead to suffering, right? And so actually losing stuff, first of all, becomes a teacher, right? Because it's showing me, it's teaching me and reminding me and revealing to me how I'm grasping, right? And actually that grasping itself is the cause of my suffering. And so actually one can come to a point, right, where one realizes actually the cause of my suffering is mainly my grasping at stuff. So actually the best thing that can happen for me is if I lose some stuff. And it reveals that to me and I let go, right? Because actually, how do people learn to let go? They learn to let go through loss.
So if you like you're saying, you equalize, loss and gain, so then what? What happens?
Like, actually the idea would be this. So if you equalize loss and gain, right? Think about it, right? Think about that state of mind, actually, right? Actually, I'll share a small example, just my own small example myself. I remember one time, like, actually twice, I was with this one Lama, where I was contemplating. Like, I was contemplating a lot like this because I was around him, And then I remember one time I walked out, and somehow he pointed out to me that my car had been keyed, like very badly. Actually, it's not here. It still has it. And I remember, like, thinking, wow, I could be upset about that, but actually, like, I don't care at all, like, because I don't think it's my car. Like, it's my car in the sense I'm using it, but it's not like my car in that grasping way. And also, I thought like, what's the way to say this? Like, I would only care if I'm identifying the car as some, like, expression of my ego. But sometimes I would, but in that moment I wasn't, because I was around him. So I thought, well, good. And I thought, actually, so that mark, I'll take that as a reminder of my own flaw, like the flaws in my ego. Good. Like, and I thought, I think the car looks better for me if it's keyed, So I'm not going to fix it either because I like that. And then I thought, wow, I'm so happy. Like, this is great. I thought, like, I'm really happy to have a key. And then every now and then, if I see the key mark, I feel really happy. I think, oh, that's great. I really like that. I think, like, if this car breaks down, I would miss the key. Then I thought, well, maybe I'd have to ask somebody to key my new car. No, I'm joking. I would ask somebody. But I really thought like that's good because it's a reminder to me of Dharma. You know what I mean? Like for me personally, it's not that keys in and of themselves, or that. But I remember thinking that, thinking, oh, I feel so like liberated from that, right? And the point is like, whereas other times, like I do the opposite. Like there is if something else I might grasp. But my point is like, so it's not that you like. My point is this: is like. Then I thought, so I remember thinking, okay, this car, right? I thought, well, the purpose of having the car is just, to, like, to go places, to be like, like for me, I work as a therapist, right? So my thought is, well, my intention to be a therapist is to be helpful to people, right? So if I'm using the car, like for that, or to drive somebody somewhere, or to help somebody, then it's great, right? But other than that, it's not going to last very long, right? Cars don't ever last that long. It's not like something. So it's not, in other words, my point is you don't have to get rid of your car, right, if you have a car. The point is that you relate to it different. I'm just giving you an example of a small one. I don't have any big ones for me, but that was a small. So my point is like, so you can relate to, so it's not that you say, oh, I don't have a car, right? If you have to help somebody using a car or do something meaningful. But the point is like you relate to it differently. And the same thing with money, right? It's not to say, like, if you're a monk and you want to, like, Geshe-la Kuncho, and you want to live under a tree, then you don't need any money, right? But it's not saying that you can't have money, right? But I'll give you, like, take the example of, some of the great.
As much weight, or don't let it dominate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you relate to it differently. That's a simple way to say it. So it's there. In other words, the money, right? Actually, if you have wisdom with money, actually, take it to follow up on what you said, right? If you have wisdom with money, actually, you recognize, okay, so I worked and I have some money right now, right? But actually, a few things. Nagarjuna points this out. He says, first of all, I may die tomorrow, right? So then I won't have any money. Right? In other words, you don't take any money. We all know this, right? You can't take money with you. Second thing is, it could become valueless tomorrow. Third thing is, somebody could steal it. Also the economy. Whatever. Wherever I put that money, that bank could go out of business. So in other words, the point is like, it's nothing substantial, right? But right now I have it. So what should I do with it? Maybe. And then the point becomes, first of all, you don't grasp at it the same way, and secondly, like Nagarjuna says, if you don't use the money in some way that's meaningful to benefit yourself or others, then it's completely useless, actually, right? Whereas if it doesn't make others happy or you happy, I mean, it's fine, but it actually has no meaning at all, right? Then it was just a piece of paper that had no meaning. Actually, the only meaning of it was it caused suffering, right? So you relate to it differently. Does that make sense? So like so it's not like you recognize it's not going to last. It's not something reliable. It's not something to take any refuge in, right? But if it's there right now, good. Either use it, use it to do something meaningful, or don't. But but you see the point there? It's like not to take refuge in it. The problem is that we often take refuge in money, in that case, right? Which is only going to cause us suffering. Does that make sense? So it's not that you can either have stuff or not have stuff. It's you relate. The goal is to relate to it differently, right? And Lama Zopa often, anyways, we just have a few minutes, but Lama Zopa often points that he gives the example. He says, actually, like, nothing is inherently yours, first of all, right? Whereas mind, the word mind, is a label, right? And like, actually, sometimes it's funny, right? First of all, actually, if you think about, I don't want to get too deep into like teachings on emptiness or anything like that, but actually take money as the example, though. Actually, what is money? Right? Like, I mean, since we're talking about it as an example, right? Actually, I mean, really, if you look at it, right, money is, what is it? It's a construct, right? It does. I mean, it's like, actually, I mean, because is it a piece of paper? Not necessarily. Now it's on. I mean, it could be on a computer screen, right? Like, it's a construct that's labeled, and that people have a mutual agreement means something to them, right? Like language often. In Buddhism, they say any word can mean anything, right? In other words, people just made up words. Like in other words, pillow, right? Whereas it's just a sound that we identify, we culturally agree means it refers to something, right? And money is similar, right? It's just like we made up something. Dollar, right, is a sound, right? Versus what, yen or something, and then we make up an idea of what the value is, right? And it's some kind of like, nowadays it's extremely complicated, right? But actually, it's funny, if you search for money, something that truly exists as money, you won't find, like, right? In other words, if you stare at your computer screen of now people do that, right? You pull up your, what's it called, online banking, right? And there are numbers there, right? But actually, they're just, what is that? Those are just pixels. Is it pixels? I don't know what it is now on the screens, right? But and if you go to even if you went to the bank and took out all that in cash, right? Like, is that money? Actually, it's a piece of paper, right? It's labeled as money culturally for our understanding. You see, I mean, that's obvious, right? And the point is like that. Wow, I mean, the idea somebody could kill themselves over something that's a concept, right, is weird, isn't it? Or kill somebody else. People kill each other, right? People kill other people all the time, right, for money, and people steal it and do all kinds of things, right? And the point is if we equalize the 8 worldly concerns, one thing is we'll never harm somebody else, right? You'll never lie to somebody for money if you do that, right? You'll never cheat somebody for. In other words, because you start to of course then you realize, well, the person's more valuable than some concept, right? Or an actual human being who I'm interacting with is infinitely more valuable, right? That's why, like, sometimes when Lama Zopa says, oh, one other person is more valuable than $1 billion or something. Sometimes we say, well, what does he mean? But actually, it's obvious. In other words, like, he's obviously right. In other words, a person is more valuable than $1 billion. There's no doubt, right? But anyway, so that makes sense. So your whole relationship to things, the goal of this is that you have stuff or you don't have stuff, but you change your relationship to it. And it's only through loss, actually. I think this is the last thing I'll say before we stop. Is going back to the point about the contemplation, right? Is that it's only through loss that people start to learn that, really, right? And so then actually, if you contemplate that enough, then you could think, oh, I hope I lose something. Right? Like, you could think, like, and that's like Geshe Lama Kuncho, right? Like, it's like, my point is like, he's not some, what's the word? I mean, he's just somebody who contemplated, right? Who like, if you contemplate it enough, you think, well, I hope I lose something and learn something from that. That'd be interesting. That'd be better than, because actually, that'd be more valuable to me than, like if somebody called me up and said, oh, you want a free something, versus I lost something tomorrow, losing it might be better for me. And you actually would feel that, right? If you contemplate, it's true, actually. You know what I mean? So that's all, like that. So it's through contemplation. My point is, it's through repeated contemplation, though. If you don't, I guess I'll conclude with that. That if you don't repeatedly contemplate, then because this is a simple way to put it for the end of this class. We'll go into karma also in future classes and things about compassion and bodhicitta. We didn't get to those yet. Taking and giving meditation. There are a lot of other topics. But to conclude today's class, I just want to say it this way, is that bad thing, in other words, problems will arise whatever you do. In other words, whether you pray or don't pray, whether you work or don't work, whether you practice any Buddhism or any other thing that you want to do or don't practice, problems are going to arise regardless, right? That's the nature of life. And the idea here, the idea for this class to summarize, there's a conclusion is this, is if you train your mind and contemplate differently, right, then you'll experience those problems differently. If you don't train your mind and contemplate differently, then it won't change, right? And the idea is like to change, so that in other words you can change your experience of those. And it's not, and again, you get it, it's not like it's not like just the power of positive thinking, and if I think one positive thought, then everything's fine and no big deal, right? That's not what it's saying. But what it's saying is, even bad experiences can become meaningful, and you can reach a point where you're not averse to them so much, but you can actually embrace. That's a metaphor Ken Rinpoche uses. He said that you can embrace life with its suffering, right? In a way that to take the meaning out of it, right, and to make life meaningful and to learn to be a more loving, compassionate, peaceful person. That's definitely possible, right? And there's no doubt that's possible, right? But the only way to do that is to change your own thinking processes, right? And change your own way of relating to things, which means your thoughts, right? You can't change your way of relating to them just by, actually it doesn't work to pray, right? To pray, may my things change. That's like, may I change and suddenly be happy. The Dalai Lama points out, he says, that doesn't do much, actually, right? And to pray not to have problems doesn't work, because they happen anyway. But if you change your mind, then you can relate to the problems differently. And but you have to do it through cultivation and through repetition, repeated contemplation, let's call it. Does that make sense, kind of? Okay. Well, we should stop there. Let's, just to conclude, though, we always do that, is, let's conclude just by, like, kind of, the idea in Buddhism is you dedicate any good karma, or any energy, so any positivity, right? So we all tried today, to contemplate some positive things and discuss something positive with each other. So let's just dedicate any positive karma, any merit, any good virtue that we created, so that we ourselves and all others, all other beings everywhere, actually can transform problems into a path of compassion, and can take problems in their lives as a way of gaining wisdom and increasing their love, empathy, and compassion for others and for themselves. Right? So that the difficult circumstances in our own lives and all others' lives not appear as sort of inherently existent, solid problems, but instead be taken as a path of compassion. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Lord.